What happens when the military's most elite warrior watches his own daughter slip away into a darkness that modern medicine can't penetrate? When every specialist, every treatment, every hope has been exhausted, and a young nurse with an unconventional background steps forward with a technique that shouldn't work, but does. Commander Jake Morrison had faced down enemy fire in 3 different countries, survived explosions that turned vehicles into twisted metal, and led rescue missions in conditions that would break most men. But nothing in his 22 years as a Navy SEAL had prepared him for watching his 12-year-old daughter Emma waste away in a hospital bed, her bright spirit dimmed by a condition that doctors couldn't fully understand, let alone cure. The diagnosis had come like a sledgehammer to the chest 6 months earlier. Emma had always been the picture of health, a vibrant girl who could outrun most boys her age, who loved rock climbing with her dad, and whose laugh could light up any room. Then came the fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, followed by muscle weakness that progressed so rapidly it left specialists scrambling for answers. Juvenile dermatomyositis with severe complications, Dr. Patricia Williams had explained in the sterile conference room at Children's Medical Center. The words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. It's an autoimmune condition where her body attacks her own muscle tissue. In Emma's case, it's progressed beyond what we typically see. Jake's wife, Sarah, had gripped his hand so tightly her knuckles went white. They'd been through deployments, through the stress of military life, through challenges that would have broken other couples. But this felt different. This felt like defeat. The treatment protocol was aggressive from the start. High-dose corticosteroids, immunosuppressants, physical therapy sessions that left Emma exhausted and crying. Jake watched his daughter transform from a girl who could climb the tallest trees in their backyard to someone who struggled to lift a glass of water. "Daddy, why can't I get better?" Emma had asked him one evening as he sat beside her hospital bed. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and the question hit him harder than any enemy bullet ever had. "We're going to figure this out, sweetheart," he'd promised, though privately he was beginning to wonder if they were fighting a war they couldn't win. The months that followed became a blur of consultations with specialists, experimental treatments, and hope that flickered and died like candles in the wind. Emma's muscle weakness progressed to the point where she needed assistance with basic tasks. Her skin developed the characteristic rash that gave the condition its name, and her energy levels dropped so low that she spent most days sleeping. Dr. Williams tried everything in her considerable arsenal. They adjusted medications, tried different combinations of immunosuppressive drugs, and even explored cutting-edge treatments that were still in clinical trials. Each new approach brought a glimmer of hope, only to be extinguished when Emma's condition either remained static or, in some cases, worsened. "I've consulted with colleagues across the country," Dr. Williams admitted during one particularly difficult meeting. "Emma's case is unusually severe. The muscle inflammation isn't responding to standard protocols, and frankly, we're running out of conventional options." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. In the military, there was always another strategy, always a backup plan. But medicine, he was learning, didn't work the same way. Sometimes there simply weren't any more moves to make. The psychological toll on the family was immense. Sarah had taken leave from her job as a high school teacher to be with Emma full-time. Their older son, Michael, a 15-year-old who'd inherited his father's athletic build and competitive spirit, struggled to understand why his little sister couldn't just get better like she had from every scraped knee and childhood illness before. Jake found himself questioning everything: his faith, his purpose, his ability to protect the people he loved most. He'd spent his career ensuring that his teammates made it home safely, but he couldn't rescue his own daughter from her failing body. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March. Emma had been hospitalized for 2 weeks following a particularly severe flare-up that had left her unable to walk. Jake was sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair that had become his second home when Dr. Williams entered with an expression he'd never seen before. "Jake, Sarah," she began, settling into the chair across from them, "I need to discuss Emma's prognosis with you." The word prognosis in a hospital setting never carried good news. Jake straightened, his military training kicking in despite the circumstances. "Emma's condition has reached a point where we need to consider long-term care options," Dr. Williams continued. "The muscle weakness is now affecting her respiratory function. She's going to need assistance with breathing, feeding, and all mobility. Based on the progression we've seen and her lack of response to treatment, we're looking at permanent disability. Sarah's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room for several seconds. Permanent disability. The words echoed in Jake's mind, each syllable hammering home a reality he wasn't ready to accept. "What exactly does that mean?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "It means Emma will likely need full-time care for the rest of her life. She may never walk again, never regain the strength she's lost. We'll focus on making her as comfortable as possible and preventing further deterioration." Jake stared at his daughter, who was sleeping peacefully despite the machines monitoring her every heartbeat. Emma's face, once round with health and mischief, had become gaunt. Her arms, which used to wrap around his neck in bare hugs that could lift his spirits after the worst days, lay motionless on the white hospital blanket. "No," he said quietly. Dr. Williams looked confused. "I understand this is difficult to process, but—" "No," Jake repeated louder this time. "You don't understand. Emma is not going to spend her life in a wheelchair. She's not going to be written off as permanently disabled. There has to be something else." Sarah reached for his hand. "Jake, we have to listen to what Dr. Williams is telling us." "I've listened for 6 months," Jake said, standing up. "I've watched my daughter disappear a little more each day while we've tried everything conventional medicine has to offer. But there has to be something else, someone else, some approach we haven't considered." Dr. Williams maintained her professional composure, though Jake could see the sympathy in her eyes. "I understand your frustration, but I've consulted with the best specialists in the field. Sometimes, despite our best efforts." "Then we find people outside the field," Jake interrupted. "We find someone who thinks differently, who sees possibilities where others see dead ends." That night, Jake began what he would later describe as the most important reconnaissance mission of his life. He reached out to former teammates who dealt with traumatic injuries, contacted military medical personnel who specialized in rehabilitation that others deemed impossible, and scoured research papers for any treatment approach that might offer hope. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that he first encountered information about alternative approaches to autoimmune conditions. Techniques that combined traditional medical treatment with methods borrowed from military training, sports medicine, and even ancient practices that had been adapted for modern use. One name kept appearing in his research: Lieutenant Rebecca Chen, a former Army nurse who had served in Afghanistan before transitioning to civilian practice. Chen had developed a reputation for achieving results with patients who had been written off by traditional medicine. Her approach was unconventional, combining rigorous physical rehabilitation with psychological techniques used in military training. Jake spent hours reading about Chen's methods. She'd worked with wounded veterans who'd been told they'd never walk again, helping them not just regain mobility but return to active duty. Her success rate with cases deemed hopeless was unprecedented, but her techniques were controversial within the medical establishment. "She uses something called progressive neural adaptation," Jake explained to Sarah after staying up until 3 a.m. researching. "It's based on the idea that the body can relearn and rebuild neural pathways even when conventional wisdom says it's impossible." Sarah looked exhausted. The strain of the past months had aged her, carved lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before Emma got sick. "Jake, I know you want to hope, but what if this is just another dead end?" "Then it's another dead end," Jake said simply. "But what if it's not? What if this Rebecca Chen can see something in Emma that everyone else has missed?" The next morning, Jake called the rehabilitation center where Chen worked. Getting an appointment seemed impossible at first. Her waiting list was months long, and Emma's case would need to be reviewed by a medical board before Chen could even consider taking her on. "Commander Morrison," the receptionist had said after Jake explained Emma's situation, "I understand your urgency, but Lieutenant Chen is very selective about the cases she accepts. She only works with patients when she believes her methods can make a significant difference." "Then let her make that determination," Jake replied. "I'm not asking for guarantees, I'm asking for a chance." 3 days later, Jake's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, a crisp voice on the other end introduced herself as Rebecca Chen. "Commander Morrison, I've reviewed your daughter's medical records. I want to meet with Emma before I make any commitments, but I think there might be possibilities that haven't been explored." Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that had sustained him through failed treatments, but the solid, grounded hope that came from finding a new mission with a clear objective. "When can you see her?" he asked. "I can be at Children's Medical Center tomorrow afternoon, but I need you to understand something first. My methods are unconventional. They require total commitment from both the patient and the family. If Emma agrees to work with me, it's going to be the hardest thing she's ever done. There are no guarantees, and conventional medicine would probably label what I do as experimental at best." Jake looked through the window at Sarah, who was sitting beside Emma's bed reading a story aloud. Emma's eyes were closed, but she was listening, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the first time Jake had seen her smile in weeks. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, "my daughter is 12 years old and she's been told she'll never walk again. Right now, experimental sounds like exactly what we need." The call ended with arrangements for Chen to visit the next day. Jake sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, feeling something shift inside him. For the first time in months, he wasn't just watching his daughter slip away. He was planning a counterattack. That evening, he sat down with Emma to tell her about Rebecca Chen. Emma listened with the seriousness that had replaced much of her childhood enthusiasm, but Jake thought he saw a spark of something in her eyes. "Daddy," she said when he finished explaining, "is she going to make me better?" Jake took his daughter's thin hand in his. "I don't know, sweetheart, but she's going to try something different, something that might work when everything else hasn't. The question is, are you ready to fight harder than you've ever fought before?" Emma's answer was barely audible, but it carried the determination that Jake recognized from his own reflection during the toughest moments of his military career. "Yes, Daddy, I'm ready to fight." As Jake settled into the chair beside Emma's bed for another night of restless hospital sleep, he allowed himself to feel something he'd forced himself to suppress for months. Tomorrow, Rebecca Chen would walk through those doors, and everything might change. For the first time since this nightmare began, defeat wasn't the only possible outcome. The war for Emma's future was about to begin, and Jake Morrison, the SEAL who never left a teammate behind, was finally ready to go on the offensive. Rebecca Chen walked into Emma's hospital room with the confident stride of someone accustomed to entering hostile territory. At 34, she possessed the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it: compact build, sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail, and an economy of movement that spoke of military precision. She wore civilian clothes, but everything about her bearing screamed former soldier. Jake studied her as she approached Emma's bed. This woman held his daughter's future in her hands, and he found himself evaluating her the way he would assess a new team member before a critical mission. What he saw gave him cautious optimism. "Emma," Chen said, settling into the chair beside the bed. Her voice carried authority but was gentle, the tone of someone who understood that strength and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. "I'm Rebecca. I hear you've been having a tough fight." Emma looked at this stranger with the wariness of a child who'd been poked, prodded, and disappointed by too many medical professionals. "Are you another doctor?" "No, I'm a nurse, but more importantly, I'm someone who believes that your body is capable of things that maybe nobody's told you about yet." Chen leaned forward slightly. "Can you tell me what hurts?" For the next hour, Chen conducted what she called an assessment, though it looked nothing like any medical examination Jake had witnessed. She asked Emma about her dreams, her fears, what she missed most about being healthy. She had Emma attempt simple movements, but instead of focusing on what Emma couldn't do, she seemed fascinated by the tiny things she could still accomplish. "Emma," Chen said after completing her evaluation, "I want to tell you about some soldiers I worked with overseas. These were men and women who'd been hurt badly, who were told they'd never be the same again. But they had something special. They had the heart of a fighter. I think you might have that same heart." Emma's eyes brightened slightly. "What happened to them?" "They got better, not because of magic or miracles, but because they were willing to work harder than they'd ever worked before. They were willing to fight their own bodies to get their lives back." Chen's gaze shifted between Emma and her parents. "The question is, are you ready for that kind of fight?" Jake felt his chest tighten. This was the conversation he'd been hopping for and dreading in equal measure. Hope, because finally someone was talking about possibilities instead of limitations. Dread, because he could see the weight of decisions settling on his 12-year-old daughter's shoulders. What would I have to do? Emma asked. Chen's smile was both warm and fierce. You'd have to become a warrior, Emma, just like your dad. The enemy isn't in some foreign country, it's inside your own body. And we're going to teach it who's really in charge. After Chen left that evening, promising to return the next day with a detailed treatment plan, Jake found himself packing the hospital corridors. Sarah had gone home to check on Michael, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the weight of possibility. Dr. Williams found him in the family lounge around midnight. Jake, I understand Rebecca Chen spoke with Emma today. She did. I want you to know that while I respect Lieutenant Chen's military service and her work with veterans, her methods aren't proven for pediatric autoimmune conditions. Emma's case is complex, and I'm concerned about raising false hopes. Jake turned to face the doctor who'd been Emma's primary physician throughout this ordeal. Dr. Williams had been compassionate, thorough, and honest, even when honesty meant delivering devastating news. Dr. Williams, with respect, your proven methods have led to a prognosis of permanent disability for my daughter. Maybe it's time for unproven. I understand your frustration, but medical science exists for a reason. We follow protocols because they're based on evidence, on careful study of what works and what doesn't. And sometimes, Jake said quietly, medical science doesn't have all the answers. In the military, we call it thinking outside the box when conventional tactics fail. Maybe it's time to apply that principle here. The next morning, Chen returned with a thick folder and a determination that reminded Jake of mission briefings from his SEAL days. She spread papers across the small table in Emma's room, exercise protocols, dietary guidelines, psychological preparation techniques, and something she called a neural reprogramming schedule. This is going to be a full-time job for all of you, Chen began. Emma, you're going to be working harder than any 12-year-old should have to work. Jake, Sarah, you're going to become my co-therapists because this kind of recovery requires round-the-clock commitment. She outlined a program that was unlike anything Jake had encountered in the medical world. It combined intensive physical therapy with techniques borrowed from military training, meditation practices adapted for children, and a nutritional approach that treated food as medicine. The core principle, Chen explained, is progressive neural adaptation. Emma's autoimmune system has essentially declared war on her muscles. We're going to teach her brain to rebuild the communication pathways to those muscles while simultaneously calming the autoimmune response through targeted physical and mental exercises. Emma listened intently as Chen described exercises that would start with movements so small they'd be barely visible, contracting individual muscle fibers, focusing mental energy on specific body parts, breathing techniques that would help regulate her nervous system. It sounds hard, Emma said when Chen finished. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done, Chen agreed. There will be days when you want to quit, when it hurts so much you'll wonder if it's worth it. That's when you'll need to remember that you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting to get your life back. The first week of Chen's program nearly broke them all. Emma's exercises began before dawn with breathing techniques that required absolute focus and discipline. Jake had thought his SEAL training was demanding, but watching his daughter struggle through exercises designed to rebuild her neural pathways was excruciating. I can't do it, Daddy, Emma cried after a particularly brutal session where she'd attempted to contract muscles that had been dormant for months. It hurts too much. Chen, who'd been monitoring every session, knelt beside Emma's bed. Pain is just information, Emma. It's your body's way of telling you something is happening. The question is, are you going to let pain make your decisions, or are you going to make pain work for you? She taught Emma techniques that Jake recognized from his own military training, mental compartmentalization, pain management through focused breathing, and the kind of psychological resilience that turned ordinary people into warriors. In Afghanistan, Chen told Emma during one of their sessions, I worked with a soldier who'd lost the use of his legs in an explosion. The doctors said the nerve damage was permanent, but he had a daughter back home about your age, and he was determined to walk at her wedding someday. Emma's eyes were fixed on Chen's face. Did he get better? He learned to walk again, not because the medical textbook said he could, but because he refused to accept that he couldn't. Every day, he worked on making his brain remember how to talk to his legs. It took 8 months, but eventually those conversations started getting through. The second week brought the first glimmer of progress. Emma managed to lift her right arm 6 inches higher than she had the previous week. It was such a small improvement that most people would have missed it, but Chen celebrated as if Emma had just won an Olympic medal. "That's your brain rebuilding pathways," Chen explained to the family. 6 months ago, those communication lines were highway systems. The autoimmune response turned them into rubble. What Emma just did is the equivalent of clearing debris and laying the first stones for reconstruction. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced since Emma's diagnosis: genuine progress. Not the false hope that came from wishful thinking, but measurable, quantifiable improvement. Dr. Williams remained skeptical. These micro-improvements could be normal fluctuation, she cautioned during Emma's weekly checkup. Autoimmune conditions often have periods of apparent improvement followed by regression. But Chen's approach was different from anything they'd tried before. Where previous treatments had focused on suppressing Emma's immune system, Chen was teaching Emma's body to regulate itself. The exercises weren't just physical. They were neurological retraining sessions designed to rebuild the connections between Emma's brain and her muscles. "Think of it like teaching someone to speak a language they used to know fluently," Chen explained to Jake one evening. "Emma's brain knows how to control her muscles. That knowledge hasn't disappeared, but the communication pathways have been disrupted. We're building new roads to carry the same messages." The third week brought a breakthrough that left everyone stunned. Emma, working through her morning exercises, suddenly sat up in bed without assistance. The movement was shaky, lasted only a few seconds, and left her exhausted, but it was undeniably progress. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, gripping Jake's hand. "Did you see her sit up by herself?" Chen, who'd been taking notes throughout the session, looked up with a smile that transformed her entire face. "Emma, do you know what you just did? You just proved that your spine remembers how to be strong." Emma's own smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. "I did it, didn't I? I really did it." "You did it," Chen confirmed. "And now we know for certain that recovery is possible." The celebration was tempered by the knowledge that this was just one small victory in what would be a long campaign. Chen had warned them from the beginning that progress would come in waves, with setbacks that would test their resolve. The first major setback came during week 4. Emma woke up one morning unable to repeat the sitting motion that had given them all so much hope. The disappointment was crushing, not just for Emma, but for the entire family. "I thought I was getting better," Emma sobbed. "Why can't I do it anymore?" Chen's response surprised them all. "This is exactly what I expected. Your body is learning a new way of functioning, and learning isn't linear. Every setback is actually information about what we need to adjust in your training." She revised Emma's exercise protocol, adding new elements based on what the setback had revealed about Emma's specific neurological patterns. Instead of treating the regression as failure, Chen used it as data to fine-tune their approach. "In the military," she explained to Jake, "we call this adaptive tactics. When one approach doesn't work, you don't abandon the mission, you modify your strategy based on what you've learned." Week 5 brought another breakthrough, this time even more dramatic than the first. Emma not only sat up unassisted, but managed to swing her legs over the side of the bed. The motion was jerky and required tremendous effort, but watching his daughter's feet touch the floor for the first time in months brought tears to Jake's eyes. "Daddy, look," Emma called out, her voice filled with wonder. "My legs remember." Chen was already adjusting the exercise protocol again, now incorporating weight-bearing activities that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. "Emma's neural pathways are rebuilding faster than I anticipated. Her military genes are definitely showing." Dr. Williams, witnessing Emma's progress during a routine checkup, found herself in the unusual position of revising a prognosis she'd been certain about. "I have to admit, this level of improvement is beyond what I expected to see. It's certainly beyond anything we achieved with conventional treatment." Jake could see the internal struggle in Dr. Williams' expression. As a medical professional, she'd been trained to trust established protocols and evidence-based treatments. Chen's success with Emma challenged everything she'd been taught about the limits of recovery from severe autoimmune conditions. "Dr. Williams," Jake said gently, "I'm not asking you to abandon medical science, but maybe science needs to expand its definition of what's possible." By the end of the second month, Emma was spending several hours each day out of bed. Her muscle strength was returning gradually but measurably, and her energy levels had improved dramatically. Most importantly, the spark in her eyes, the essential M&S that had been dimmed by months of illness, was burning bright again. Chen's program had evolved into a comprehensive lifestyle change for the entire family. Jake found himself applying military discipline to nutrition planning, exercise scheduling, and the psychological support that Emma needed to maintain her motivation through the difficult days. Recovery isn't just about the patient, Chen explained during one of their weekly strategy sessions. It's about creating an environment where healing becomes inevitable instead of accidental. Sarah had returned to work part-time, but she approached Emma's care with the intensity of someone managing a complex project. She tracked Emma's daily progress, monitored her responses to different exercises, and maintained the detailed records that helped Chen continuously refine their approach. "Mom's like a scientist now," Emma observed one day, watching Sarah update the charts that covered one wall of their home. "She writes down everything I do." "That's because everything you do matters," Chen replied. "Your recovery isn't happening by accident. It's happening because every single day we're making choices that support your body's ability to heal itself." The transformation wasn't just physical. Emma's confidence was returning along with her strength. She began setting goals for herself, first to walk across her hospital room, then to make it to the nurse's station, eventually to walk outside and feel sunshine on her face. "I want to climb a tree again," she told her father one evening. "Not right away, but someday. Do you think I'll ever be able to climb trees again?" Jake looked at his daughter, who was sitting cross-legged on her bed working through the evening meditation exercises that Chen had taught her. 6 months ago, she couldn't lift her arms. Now she was talking about climbing trees. "Emma," he said, "if these past 2 months have taught me anything, it's that you're capable of things that nobody thought were possible. If you want to climb trees, we'll figure out how to make that happen." Chen's final evaluation at the end of the second month was more than any of them had dared to hope for. Emma's muscle strength had improved by 60% from her baseline measurements. Her endurance was approaching normal levels for a child her age, and most remarkably, her autoimmune markers were stabilizing without the heavy medications that had failed to help her earlier. "Emma," Chen said as she packed up her equipment for the last time, "you've just accomplished something that medical textbooks say is impossible. You've taught your body to heal itself through pure determination and hard work." Emma, who could now stand and walk short distances without assistance, hugged Chen tightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "You never gave me a reason to give up," Chen replied. "You fought like the warrior I knew you could become." As Jake watched this exchange, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he'd been a broken father watching his daughter slip away from him. Today, he was witnessing the completion of the most successful mission of his life, not because he'd defeated an enemy, but because he'd found someone who could teach his daughter to defeat the enemy within herself. 6 months after Rebecca Chen had walked out of their lives, Emma Morrison stood at the base of the climbing wall at the local recreation center, her small hands chalked and ready. The wall stretched 15 feet above her, dotted with colorful holds that would challenge even experienced climbers. Jake watched from below, his heart pounding with a mixture of pride and protective anxiety. "You sure about this, sweetheart?" he asked, checking her safety harness one more time. Emma looked up at the wall, then back at her father with eyes that sparkled with the determination he'd first seen during those grueling weeks of recovery. "Dad, I've been training for this for 3 months. Chen taught me that my body can do anything my mind believes it can do." The transformation had been nothing short of miraculous. Emma hadn't just recovered from her autoimmune condition. She'd emerged stronger than she'd ever been before. The discipline and mental training that Chen had instilled during those crucial months had become a foundation for everything Emma approached in life. "Remember what we practiced," Jake said, slipping into the coaching role he'd adopted since Emma had expressed interest in competitive climbing. "Trust your body, listen to what it's telling you, and if something doesn't feel right." "I stop and reassess," Emma finished with a grin. "I know, Dad, you've only told me 1,000 times." Jake stepped back and watched his daughter begin her ascent. Each movement was calculated, purposeful, displaying the kind of mental focus that Chen had taught her during their sessions. Emma's approach to climbing bore the hallmarks of the neural training she'd undergone: deliberate, mindful, and absolutely fearless. The other parents at the recreation center had no idea they were watching a minor miracle in action. To them, Emma was just another athletic kid pursuing a challenging sport. They couldn't know that 18 months ago, this same girl had been declared permanently disabled by some of the country's most respected medical professionals. "She's a natural," commented Tom Bradley, whose own daughter was waiting for her turn on the wall. "How long has she been climbing?" "About 6 months," Jake replied, never taking his eyes off Emma as she navigated a particularly challenging sequence of holds. 6 months, that's incredible. She climbs like she's been doing it for years. Jake smiled at the irony. In a way, Emma had been preparing for this moment her entire life, though neither of them had known it at the time. The mental toughness that Chen had helped her develop wasn't just about recovering from illness. It was about approaching every challenge with the mindset of a warrior. Emma reached the top of the wall and rang the bell, her triumphant whoop echoing through the gym. As she rappelled down, Jake could see the pure joy on her face, the same expression she'd worn as a younger child when she'd accomplished something that had seemed impossible. "How'd I do?" she asked breathlessly as her feet touched the ground. "You were amazing," Jake said, meaning every word. "Chen would be proud." At the mention of Chen's name, Emma's expression grew more serious. "I wish she could see me climb. Do you think she knows how much she changed our lives?" Jake had wondered the same thing countless times. Chen had moved on to other patients, other impossible cases that needed her unique blend of military discipline and medical innovation. They'd kept in touch sporadically, but Jake knew that for Chen, Emma's recovery was just one victory in an ongoing war against the limitations that conventional medicine sometimes accepted too readily. "I think she knows," Jake said, "but maybe it's time we made sure." That evening, Jake sat down to write an email he'd been composing in his head for months. He wanted to tell Chen about Emma's climbing, about her return to school, about the way she'd become an inspiration to other kids facing their own medical challenges. But mostly, he wanted her to know that the techniques she'd taught Emma had become a permanent part of who she was. The response came within hours, and it was so characteristically Chen that Jake could hear her voice in every word. "Jake, Emma's success doesn't surprise me. I saw something in her from the first day that convinced me she was going to be extraordinary. But what you and Sarah did, creating an environment where healing could happen, maintaining discipline when everything seemed hopeless, never accepting limitations as permanent, that was the real key to her recovery. Emma had great teachers long before she met me. I just gave her some new tools to use what you'd already built in her. Give my regards to that warrior daughter of yours, R.C." Jake read the email aloud to Sarah and Emma over dinner. Emma listened with the intensity she brought to everything now, and when he finished, she was quiet for several minutes. "Dad," she finally said, "I want to do something to help other kids like me, kids who are told they can't get better." The idea that began forming that evening would eventually become the Emma Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to funding alternative treatment approaches for children with autoimmune conditions. But in the immediate aftermath of Emma's recovery, the family was focused on something much simpler: learning how to live with the extraordinary gift they'd been given. Emma's return to school had been a celebration that transcended the usual boundaries between students, teachers, and administrators. Her 7th-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had maintained Emma's desk throughout her absence, refusing to reassign it even when the classroom became overcrowded. "We always knew you'd be back," Mrs. Patterson said on Emma's first day back. "The question was never if but when." Emma's classmates welcomed her return with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Many of them had visited her during her illness, watching her gradually disappear into weakness and pain. Seeing her return stronger than ever challenged their understanding of what was possible when someone refused to give up. "Emma, how did you get better?" asked her best friend Chloe during lunch. "My mom said the doctors thought you'd never walk again." Emma considered the question carefully. Chen had taught her that explanations mattered, that telling her story might help other people understand that recovery was possible even from conditions that seemed hopeless. "I learned to fight differently," Emma said simply. "Instead of fighting against my body, I learned to fight for it, and I had really good teachers who showed me how to be stronger than I thought I could be." The conversation sparked something in Emma that grew stronger over the following weeks. She began keeping a journal, documenting not just her continued recovery, but her observations about what had made the difference in her treatment. The journal entries revealed a wisdom that seemed remarkable in someone so young. Chen taught me that pain is just information. When something hurts, it's not telling you to stop, it's telling you to pay attention. The difference between giving up and getting stronger is learning to listen to what your body is really saying. Dad always talks about mission objectives from his military days. Recovery is like that too. You have to know what you're fighting for, not just what you're fighting against. I wasn't fighting against being sick. I was fighting for the chance to climb trees and run races and be the person I was supposed to become. The hardest part wasn't the exercises or the pain or even the setbacks. The hardest part was believing I could get better when everyone else had stopped believing. That's when you find out who you really are, when you have to choose between what other people think is possible and what you know in your heart is true. These insights caught the attention of Dr. Williams, who had been quietly documenting Emma's case for potential publication in medical journals. Emma's recovery challenged so many assumptions about autoimmune treatment that Dr. Williams felt obligated to share what they'd learned with the broader medical community. "Emma, would you be willing to speak to a group of doctors about your experience?" Dr. Williams asked during a routine follow-up appointment. "I think your story could help other physicians understand that there might be treatment approaches they haven't considered." Emma's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "If it could help other kids get better, I'll talk to anyone." The presentation took place at Children's Medical Center 6 months after Emma's climbing wall triumph. The conference room was packed with pediatric specialists, nurses, and residents who'd heard rumors about the girl who'd recovered from a condition that typically resulted in lifelong disability. Emma stood at the front of the room with the same confidence she brought to everything now. She wore a simple dress, but her posture and bearing reflected the inner strength that had carried her through her darkest days and into this moment of triumph. "My name is Emma Morrison," she began, "and a year and a half ago, some very smart doctors told me I would never walk again. They were wrong, but they weren't lying. They were telling me what medical science believed was true. The difference between being wrong and being right wasn't about medical science. It was about finding someone who believed that my body could learn to heal itself if I was willing to work hard enough to teach it how." Emma spoke for 20 minutes, describing Chen's techniques, the daily discipline required, and the mental training that had been as important as the physical rehabilitation. But mostly, she talked about the power of refusing to accept limitations as permanent. "The most important thing I learned," Emma concluded, "is that recovery isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. Every day, with every choice, you're either moving toward health or accepting sickness. Chen taught me that I got to choose which direction I was moving." The questions from the medical professionals were thoughtful and probing. They wanted to understand the mechanics of Chen's approach, the measurable improvements, the potential applications to other cases. Emma answered each question with the precision of someone who'd lived every detail of her recovery. Dr. Sandra Martinez, a pediatric rheumatologist from San Francisco, asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. "Emma, do you think your recovery was because of Lieutenant Chen's techniques, or do you think you would have gotten better anyway with more time?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Dr. Martinez, I spent 6 months getting worse with the best traditional treatment available. I started getting better within weeks of beginning Chen's program. But more than that, Chen taught me to believe in my own strength. She showed me that my body wanted to heal, and she gave me the tools to help it remember how." After Emma finished speaking, Dr. Williams presented the clinical data from Emma's case. The improvements in muscle strength, endurance, and autoimmune markers were undeniable. More importantly, the improvements had sustained themselves over time, suggesting that Emma's recovery was genuine and permanent. This case challenges our understanding of what's possible with pediatric autoimmune conditions, Dr. Williams concluded. While we can't generalize from a single case, Emma's recovery suggests that we might be limiting our patients' potential by accepting disability as inevitable. The impact of Emma's presentation extended far beyond that conference room. Within months, Children's Medical Center had established a pilot program incorporating elements of Chen's approach into their treatment protocols for autoimmune conditions. Other hospitals began reaching out, wanting to understand how they might adapt these techniques for their own patients. Emma found herself in the unexpected position of being an advocate for an approach to medicine that combined the best of traditional treatment with innovative rehabilitation techniques. She spoke at conferences, participated in research studies, and most importantly, mentored other children who were facing their own battles with chronic illness. "The thing about being sick," Emma told a group of young patients during one of her visits to the hospital, "is that it teaches you things about yourself that you never would have learned otherwise. I discovered that I'm stronger than I thought, braver than I believed, and more determined than anyone imagined. Those discoveries didn't go away when I got better. They became part of who I am." Jake watched these presentations with a mixture of pride and amazement. The daughter who had once struggled to lift a glass of water was now inspiring medical professionals to reconsider their approach to treatment. Emma had become living proof that the impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been achieved yet. 2 years after her recovery, Emma competed in her first regional climbing competition. Jake stood in the crowd, watching his daughter navigate a route that had defeated climbers twice her age. Emma's approach was methodical, fearless, and infused with the mental discipline that had saved her life. When she reached the top and rang the bell, the applause was thunderous. But Emma wasn't climbing for the crowd or the competition. She was climbing because she could, because her body had remembered its strength, because Rebecca Chen had taught her that limitations were often just starting points for new possibilities. As Emma rappelled down to where her family waited, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They'd started with a daughter who'd been declared permanently disabled. They were ending with a young woman who'd learned that the word, impossible, was really just an invitation to try harder. "How was it?" Sarah asked as Emma landed safely on the ground. Emma's smile was radiant. "It was perfect, Mom. Everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be." Jake hugged his daughter, this remarkable young woman who'd taught an entire family that miracles weren't things that happened to you. They were things you worked for, fought for, and ultimately achieved through the power of refusing to accept defeat. Rebecca Chen had given them much more than a treatment protocol. She'd given them a new understanding of what it meant to be human, to face impossible odds, and to emerge not just victorious but transformed. Emma's recovery had become a testament to the power of combining medical science with warrior spirit, proving that sometimes the most important healing happens not despite the odds, but because of them. The little girl who'd been told she'd never walk again was now teaching others how to climb mountains, both literal and metaphorical. And in doing so, she'd become exactly what Chen had seen in her from the very beginning, not just a survivor, but a warrior whose greatest battles had prepared her for a lifetime of extraordinary achievements. Emma Morrison had learned to fight for her life. In the process, she discovered that life was always worth fighting for.